Welcome to tonight's webinar on behalf of CIBSE Southern Region. My name is Gary Jones. I'm a regional committee member. Tonight we have Clean Air Technologies talking about transfer of clean room tech across to mechanically ventilated space. Without further ado, I'm going to let Brendan McManus to start and give you the scene of what they've been doing and the research involved in it, and then he will hand on to colleagues to do the presentation. Brendan, it's all over to you.
Thank you, Gary. Yes, so my name is Brendan McManus. I'm the CEO of Clean Air Technologies. Clean Air Technologies for the last 22 years has been involved in design, build and validation of clean rooms and containment laboratories through different sectors in the UK and in France. Our product is peace of mind. We believe that by offering operator, environmental and product protection, that we not only meet the regulatory requirements, but we enable the client to focus on his activity in the security of a fully functional, validated environment. On my right is Richard. Richard will be presenting the CPD element of the presentation, and he is one of our lead designers. So with the COVID outbreak, we started with the why, and we believe passionately that a ventilation system should mitigate the risk of airborne infection, not increase it. So we believe there was an opportunity for a technology transfer for the work that we've done in clean rooms and containment to mitigate the risk in office spaces, schools, etc., etc. Next slide, Henry. We have a pedigree in supplying air safety components to the most prestigious or the largest projects in Europe. We were involved in the Air Fusion reactor, where we developed a airtight fire damper. We also worked in Chernobyl, where we provided the 27 seismic air handling units for the containment. Anyway, we also worked in the CIBSE laboratory, which is a BSL4 biosafety level 4 laboratory, the most airtight lab in Europe, and we developed a way of testing the actual leakage in that lab, because in Swiss they wanted to know what the leakage was rather than it was airtight. So we had to provide a metric to prove the airtightness of that lab. We also worked at the Francis Crick Institute in London, and again that was as a consultancy looking over the construction to lead how to achieve an airtight space. And we work in many clean room sectors of basic vaccine manufacturers, parentals, etc., etc. So that's our pedigree. So,
yeah, thank you very much.
I'll hand across to Richard. How would you like?
Thank you. So yeah, what I'm going to be covering this evening, the first half of the presentation is going to cover the principles behind clean rooms and the technology we employ within them. Then the second half of the presentation is going to go into how we've taken that technology and, in light of the coronavirus pandemic, looking to apply them to office environments and workplaces. So the first question is, what is a clean room? So it's the difference between an adjective and a noun. So a clean room is basically visible dirt. If it looks clean, it's considered a clean room. But a clean room is micron scale clean. So basically the dirt and contaminants are scrubbed out down to the micron level. So it's not something you can look at and declare clean or not. It's something that's tested and validated and proven prior to activities going ahead within it. So examples of activities that take place in clean rooms, vaccines. So they're very, very sensitive and relatively unstable products that need to be kept at a certain temperature. So you can't risk heat treating a vaccine after it's been produced, because it will destabilise and it won't do its job. So it's important that a vaccine is produced in an environment that eliminates, what we call an aseptic environment, eliminates any sources of contamination while it's being produced and the vials being filled. Disk drives, microchips, the dust particles we're talking about would dwarf the feature size on the chips themselves. So any particles would pretty much invalidate an entire wafer. A lot of money would be wasted. So once again, you need to be certain that the environment you're producing in is completely cleaned down to the micron level prior to manufacture. Ointment solutions, drugs, carbon fibre and composites, again, any inclusions will affect the strength characteristics and need to be eliminated prior to manufacture. So these are the kind of areas that we use, but I think we're always surprised by what other things get done in these spaces. So the next question is, how do we define a clean room and what makes it different to a standard space? So clean rooms, I'll go into more in definition, but they are basically classified on the number of particles per cubic metre. There are other classifications or considerations, temperature, humidity, lighting levels, things like that, but they all come secondary to what makes it a clean room, which is how many particles you get in a cubic metre of air.
So it's airborne,
airborne particles, yeah. So there's kind of 5 characteristics we think define a clean room. So the first is HEPA filtered air. So we make sure that all of the air that's introduced into the facility goes through a HEPA filter that filters out 99.99% of particles below a certain size or above a certain size. The next step is overpressures. The idea is that we introduce more air into a clean room than we extract. That forces the difference to be forced out through any cracks in the envelope, out through on doorways, vision panels, ceiling tiles, anything like that. And the idea is that any particles outside that want to contaminate the space can't force their way past those air streams. So you're always flushing the air with HEPA filtered, positively pressurized air. Once you've controlled the air, the next step is the room finishes. So it's no good filtering out all the particles coming into the room from outside if you've then got particles being generated within the space. So people walk around in clean rooms, they're operating equipment, there are vibrations from the ventilating plant. All of these will shake surfaces and launch off minute particles if they're not designed correctly. So we employ vinyls that we know don't shed. We use glass and silicon sealants and so on, powder-coated metals or stainless steels, anything we know won't produce an additional burden to the room. The next step is the operative. So once you've eliminated outside sources of contamination and inside sources of contamination, you're then bringing people into the equation who shed millions of particles left to their own devices. So they go through a very stringent gowning procedure and sometimes multi-stage gowning procedures where they cap themselves from top to bottom to make sure that anything they're going to shed stays within the suit and doesn't get spread to the product or the environment. And the last step is a cleaning regime. So once you've taken all these precautions, you then need to work on the absolute microscopic dirt. So they will very fastidiously clean every last square inch of the facility with a range of different sterilising agents. Sometimes they'll alternate week to week. So they use different cleaning products week on week so that the bacteria can't become adapted to one. It'll then get killed off by the one they use the following week. So yeah, it's very sort of disciplined process. So in terms of classifying a room, there's 2 key regulatory characteristics that are applied. So one is GMP, which is good manufacturing practice. That's primarily used for anything involving human medication. So it'd be vaccines, it'd be medicines, it'd be medical devices. The other set of classifications is the International Standards Organization. That's more used for manufacturing devices, jet engines, microchips, things like that. But they both pretty much work off the same standard, which is counting the number of particles in a cubic metre of air and then reading that number off in a table and classifying the cleanliness. So to give an idea of the kind of particles we're talking about, human air sit around the 80 micron range. The size particle you can see is around the 40 to 50 micron range. We're working all the way down in the less sort of sub-micron range, so 0.1 to sort of 0.3, smoke, bacteria, viruses. These are the things we're very keen on filtering out of the air. And to put it into another perspective, a typical urban environment, you're looking at up to 70 million particles per cubic metre of air. An office environment, up to 35 million. Surgery, it takes place in an environment with up to 1.8 million particles per cubic metre, which sounds a lot, but obviously that's a validated and proven strategy that that level is clean enough that human beings can fight off any kind of remaining potential pathogens. But for semiconductors and absolute, top state-of-the-art clean rooms, talking tens or hundreds of particles per cubic metre. So I talked earlier about classification. So what you'll do is you'll classify usually at 2 particle sizes, which is 0.5 and 5 microns. You use a device called a particle counter to count the number of particles in the air, and then you can see the classification on the left-hand side there. Usually that's defined up front, so you'll know from your process or from the medicine you're producing what classification you need, and then design for that using prior experience to define things like filter grade, amount of air, number of times we change out air in every hour within a space, will then define how clean we can get the room. Now the classification went through a change. It initially started out by counting the number of particles per cubic foot of air. And then it was a nice straightforward system. 1 particle per cubic foot was class 1, 100 particles was class 100. Then we went metric, so the whole thing became a lot less intuitive. So what we do is we multiply by 35.2 for any result, and that extrapolates out to a cubic meter. So the reason you've got these sort of odd sounding numbers, 3,520 for example, is because we've done the conversion from imperial to metric. So once we've taken all those design considerations into effect, the next thing is to kind of prove that this facility is operating as a clean room. So no regulatory body will take our word for it. They'll want to see evidence that we're actually classifying these rooms, according to the table we looked at earlier. So they're done on 5 key parameters. The first is counting the particles. The next is to make sure that the HEPA filter that's been installed is doing its job. After that, we check room pressures to make sure that air is being flushed from high pressure to low pressure areas. We look at the air change rate and we look at the clean-up times. So particle counting, we've covered fairly well so far, but basically the device itself uses a probe and a laser scattering chamber. So it basically pumps in air. Cubic meter can take up to 10 to 13 minutes. And what we do is we look at the size of the room, look at the guidelines, define the number of locations we sample within the space, and then count up all the particles. And that's done on a validated piece of equipment that prints out a receipt. So there's no fudging results or anything. It's there and it's validated, and it goes into a validation package. Next up, we do the HEPA filter testing. So a HEPA filter will come out of the factory having been tested to 99.99% efficiency, and the factory will issue a certificate against that. But it's then put in a box, put on an aeroplane, on a boat, on the motorway, rattles down the motorway, gets to the construction site, usually left in a room for a while, find out, get installed. Another 4 or 5 months later, the lab gets commissioned. So in that time, there's no guarantee that it's retained its integrity, and it also doesn't really speak to the integrity of the housing that it's going to be installed in. So what we do is we introduce a very precisely defined aerosol challenge upstream of the filter, and we measure the concentration of aerosol upstream. We then scan the downstream, the other side of the filter, and we measure the percentage of these oil droplets that have made it through the filter, and then it's a fairly straightforward sum. If we've got 100% saturated air behind the filter and 0.001% is making it through, then we've got our filter classification. So that's always done when you fit a new filter, and it's done pretty well periodically every 6 months to a year, just to give reassurance that the facility is still functioning. So overpressures are another way that we ensure that the room remains clean. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to prevent any particles outside of the laboratory forcing their way into the lab. So we set up a cascade. So the most sensitive, cleanest areas of the facility are the highest pressure, 50, 70, even up to 100 pascals compared to ambient. Then you work down in 15 pascal steps as you move out of the facility through change areas, through prep areas, and then finally you've got a plus 22 pascal jump to outside. So air is being forced out through every doorway. Now, to give reassurance, because it can be quite difficult to detect air as you're moving through a facility, we basically have magnetic gauges. So these don't run on electricity. They are measuring differential pressure with a diaphragm, giving physical readout of the pressure. So operatives will check that before they enter a space to make sure it's operated correctly. So next we're going to look at air clean-up time. So it's all well and good preventing particles from entering and filtering them out of the air, but it's no good if there's a source of contamination and it takes several days to clean up. So what we do is usually when the facility is first built, we go through an operational qualification where we'll artificially contaminate the space and then record how long it takes to clean up or scrub down that space. Now, that's one of the key technologies that we'll look at later in our application into workspaces. But basically, it's all about diffusion. So it's not just about filtering the air, it's about distributing it through the room, making sure that we're churning up the air, making sure that we're keeping particles buoyant and then extracting them. So it's important not just to show that the air is clean, but also to make sure that, that the facility can handle contamination as it's generated when the lab's in operation. Now, in terms of air distribution, there are sort of two types. There's laminar flow and turbulent flow. Now, an ideal clean room, you would have a complete ceiling distributing air downwards, and you would have a complete floor backing the air away. So the whole space gets swept and scrubbed, and all the particles get caught up and immediately removed and captured in or discharged from the facility. Unfortunately, you need to have a usable space. You need to have equipment in there. You need to have people operating in there. So any clean room is a trade-off between the ideal scenario and the practical implementation. So usually you will have general diffusers squirting air over half of the laboratory, and then you'll have dedicated laminar flow hoods over sensitive areas, production lines, filling lines, that sort of thing. The other thing is we want to make sure that the air is constantly being churned up. We don't want any stagnant air where particles can settle out and land on a product or contaminate the process. So we need to keep the air turbulent so that the particles remain buoyant and then get captured. So to summarise, clean rooms are used in an increasing range of industries. I think the more high-tech something gets, the more sensitive it becomes to contamination. The pathogens and what we're cleaning out isn't immediately visible, and a lot of contamination comes from individuals working in a space. Something I haven't quite covered yet, but also it's not just about the design of the laboratory, it's about the behaviour of the people within it as well. They will go through their own training to make sure that they don't do anything to sort of, put an additional burden on the space. And that we validate. This is the other thing. So once a facility is being designed and built, we will go along and we will carry out all of these different tests and we'll wrap them up into a report, and that report then gets packaged up and handed to the regulatory authority. It could be the Human Tissue Authority, it could be the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority, but they will want to see the history of the lab and how it's been built and how we've demonstrated that it's compliant before they manufacture. So that kind of covers, what, 22 years for Brendan and 13 years for me in designing labs. Yeah. No, it doesn't. So next up is how we're going to take this technology and transfer it across to the workplace, especially in light of the COVID pandemic. So there was a call to arms by CIBSE, who asked for sort of ideas, suggestions, any technologies that could be brought up to help combat the pandemic and the spread of pathogens in the workplace. Clean Air Technologies was involved in doing a paper which was presented last year at the symposium.
We're interested in remote pressure drop solutions, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we kind of took that lead and we went to look at the market and what was available and what could be applied to workspaces, bearing in mind it needed to be a low energy solution. So we looked at ionization systems mounted in ducts. That system we fairly quickly moved on from. So it's been installed in the various schools in New York, who are now being sued by the Education Board because it was demonstrated that these weren't capturing particles. We also looked at ultraviolet sterilisation because obviously there's next to no pressure drop because there's nothing in the way of the air. But the issue we found was the air is whipping past the lights and it's not getting the dwell time needed to kill off the pathogens. So viable counts were through the roof with this kind of filtration. We also looked at various impregnated foams. So these have a lower air resistance and HEPA filtration, and they're impregnated with silver iodide and various other sort of microscopic sterilising agents. And they may do a good job of killing off the pathogens they do capture, but the overall level of pathogens they capture were very low. Again, the air was flying through. These weren't dense enough to capture particles from the air and trap them. So we tested them. We went to various research facilities. We ran the particle counting, and we didn't get results we were happy with. So we pretty quickly settled back on what we knew and what's been proven over many decades now, which is that HEPA filters will trap pathogens down to the submicron size. They don't need to kill them off because once a particle's been captured, it's not going to cause any harm. So next we looked at kind of the enemy we're dealing with, which is that we've got contaminating particles spreading up to 2 meters and infecting other people. So the key thing here was to intercept particles before they spread between people, or to reduce the density and the viral load of the air, as it's being transferred. So not wanting to reinvent the wheel, we looked at market again and saw that there were mobile filtration systems being advertised. So we obtained one and carried out some tests on it, specifically air smoke visualization. So we squirt smoke into the air and look at what the air is actually doing. And what we found was that while these filtration units had fans, filters, operating at maximum efficiency, H14, and the fans were pumping enough air to theoretically completely change out the air approximately 12 times an hour, what they're actually doing is just circulating air down one end of the room, doing nothing to capture, keep buoyant, and extract particles from the other side of the room. So effectively, we're finding that 30 to 40% of the room was being cleaned down, and the other 70% was capturing those. Yeah, it was just diluting.
We just bought another dimension.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we quickly realised that it wasn't just a case of fans and filters. It was about how we distribute the air, exactly what we find from designing clean rooms. So the solution we eventually developed involves having a high-level fan filter unit, HEPA fan filter unit, with a swirl diffuser. So this is technology we brought over from the clean room industry, and this will basically sweep the entire room with a very broad cone of air at relatively high velocity, keep the particles buoyant, and sweep them all towards an extract point at low level. And this was the other key element for us, that we needed high-level supply, low-level extract. We experimented with high-level extract, but what we found was as soon as we switched on any incumbent air conditioning systems, it completely disrupted that process, and we just weren't getting the capture rate that we needed. So the kind of entry-level implementation, and we'll do a quick walk around in a minute. This is actually what's going in the room that we're presenting from now. So we have a HEPA filter, HEPA fan filter at high level, running constantly, providing sort of a baseline level of capture of airborne particles. High-level supply, low-level extract. We're also monitoring carbon dioxide levels in the space as well. So carbon dioxide correlates with human activity. The more people are moving about, the more they're breathing, talking, shouting, not here, but
that's my
yeah, exactly. The more carbon dioxide gets released into the air. So we then use that to fire up a second unit, which is either tapped into a fresh air from outside through a heat recovery system or into the building supply as well. So we're not just running one system 100% round the clock. We're balancing the load that's being applied to the room with the energy requirements. So the more load there is, the more energy we'll use. Less load there is, less energy we'll use. So we're not running fans unnecessarily. Now, there's a quick sort of aside here. I was going to say it's quite a dead end, but it's a blind alley that we've salvaged something from. We found a company in Switzerland that are, is it Switzerland? Or? Yeah, Switzerland, yeah, that are manufacturing a particle counter. Now, typically when we validate labs, we're using particle counters that weigh a lot, cost tens of thousands, but are calibrated. But we found a company producing particle counters the size of 2 matchboxes. So we thought, well, how can we use that? Could we link this to fan speed and use that to actually directly control the airborne particulate challenge? What we found was that offices have many different sources of contamination. So it's not just particles coming from people. You've got carpets, you've got walls, you've got ceilings that are acoustic tiles and the shedding. So unfortunately, we couldn't really apply that technology to workplaces, but we did realise that there was potentially an opportunity to apply this to clean rooms. So one of the things we're investigating now is using this for real-time HEPA monitoring. So rather than going into a space every 3, 6, 12 months and doing particle counts, we could monitor the air coming off of the HEPA filter around the clock and link that to an alarm system. So should a filter become damaged, suddenly let by, or be a massive source of room contamination, that would trigger an alert, could be trigger an investigation into the production line.
And also, it could be very useful in containment facilities as well, couldn't it? Where the filters are a safety component. So it's a technology that we're now transferring from offices into clean rooms.
Absolutely, yes, we've gone full circle. But whether it's a clean room or a containment laboratory, they're the sort of things you don't want to be finding out 6 months down the line. You want some kind of immediate alert to kind of trigger an investigation. So the next step to this was supply chain. So with Brexit and ironically because of coronavirus as well, we're finding that we can't really source exotic components readily. So we needed a supply chain that was local and we needed very simple and basic components. So HEPA fan filter units, for example, are warehoused here in Kent or locally. Ductwork is off the shelf. The only specialist component really is the extract. So that we can design to suit any office environment. And we found local companies, and up and down the country there'll be companies that do bespoke office fit out. So we wanted to keep it at that skill level, so it didn't need particularly specialist installers.
Yeah, and the sole role of the system is to remove particulate, nothing else. It's complementary to any existing HVAC system.
Yeah.
So it's just focusing on particulate removal.
That's right, yeah. So obviously we didn't expect everyone to take our word for it. So we wanted to find out just how well that system performed. So using the space we're in currently, we put in an artificial particulate challenge to about 100,000 particles per cubic metre. And then we ran a top of the line mobile filtration system. And you see the blue trace here, that's the number of particles counted every minute. After about 20 minutes, half an hour, it cleaned down to about 1,600 particles per cubic metre. But after that, it couldn't get any lower, which kind of bears out our findings that it wasn't sweeping down the entire room. It was only doing a small proportion of it, circulating at one end of the room, not sweeping down the entire space. So it was never able to fully clean down the room. So then we removed that unit and repeated the test, but this time using our overhead top-down system. Now, this is a logarithmic scale, so it's a bit misleading, but it basically hits 0. So 1 or 2 particles are detected. Now we said we multiply by 35 to go from imperial to metric, but basically we're seeing no more than a few tens of particles per cubic metre, and after an hour it pretty much cleaned down to 0 particles, so nothing was detectable in the air after that time. So already that gave us confidence that the approach we were taking and our theorising was bearing out.
Another dimension of safety.
Yeah, exactly. It's another dimension of safety. So the next step, or the next piece of the puzzle, was to link airborne particulate contamination with the risk of the individual. So can we prove that reducing airborne particulate levels corresponds to a reduced risk of somebody becoming infected with COVID? Now, fairly early on in the pandemic, the Max Planck Institute published a scientific paper where they produced a mathematical model to quantify the relationship between, room size, airflow rates, number of people in the room, so on and so forth. So we took the space we were in, we ran it through the mathematical model based on 1 person in the room being infected, 7 uninfected, 6 hours a day, 2 days spent in the space. So that'd be 2 days of busy meetings. And we modelled up the mobile system, our system, and also just a system that was running an air conditioning unit. And what we found was that the mobile system gave about a 55% reduction over the benchmark system. Now that's pretty good. And in a short term, in a pinch, it does the trick. However, with our system, we were finding it was actually a 79% reduction. So there's kind of 2 arguments in favour of a fixed installation. First of all, that you obviously get a significantly higher reduction in airborne particulates. And the other is that can be validated. So you put in a mobile system, you can do your particle counts, you can do your air change rates, but a week later, when the validation engineers have left site, somebody could switch it off because it's too noisy, they can fiddle with the controls, they can move it, and suddenly that space isn't validated anymore because it's changed from when it was last signed off. But with a fixed installation that's been commissioned, it can't be changed, it can't be interfered with, it will always do the job it was designed to do, and then visits can come back every 6 months, every year, and confirm that it's still operating and certify the space. So I'm going to do a quick break on the presenting here, and I'm going to show you a 3D walk around of the space we're currently in. Brendan fills in usually.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at basically a retrofit system to begin with because we wanted it to be able to be fitted by a fit-out contractor. We wanted it to be a simple system that delivered the additional dimension of safety, but we could supply it as components to be fitted by a competent contractor or fit out contractor.
Yep.
So it had, as I say, they didn't want to get involved in temperature, humidity, but we were interested in the movement in particular.
Yeah, it's basically designed to work in tandem. So you can see up here, we've got a cassette unit here. So one of the tests that we carried out was to make sure that the airstream coming off of the fan filter unit, the air conditioning unit up here, mixed up, wouldn't overpower what you can see up here, which is a straw diffuser, which we've taken directly from the cleanroom industry. So the system basically, the room we're in now, you've got this low level extract rule that's designed to blend in with the space. The air goes up a duct here, overhead, gets filtered and distributed at a high level here. So you're constantly sweeping the entire space to get it cleaned out.
So it's directly connected into the fan filter, HEPA fan filter.
That's right, yeah, and monitoring the carbon dioxide levels here. So this one, this carbon dioxide monitor will fire up the second system up in the corner here. And that will start pulling in fresh air from outside to sort of dilute down the area further.
And for energy, the carbon dioxide monitor has its own PIR, so then it only activates when people enter the room.
Yes, that's right, yes. So it's sort of got 3 steps basically. So it's usually running on low tick over when the room is not occupied. As soon as it detects people entering the room, it will ramp up to about 25 to 50%. It will tick along at that. As soon as the carbon dioxide levels start to creep up, that correlates with increased human activity, and it will ramp up to 400%. Gets a bit noisier, takes a bit more energy, but once it's controlled those levels, then it comes sort of back down and then ticks over again. So there's a couple of elements to kind of prove the facility is working. So you've got a device here which is monitoring the airflow, and it's just sort of plays a little animation to indicate that the air is flowing, to give confidence that the fans are operating. We've also got a magnet here that goes just outside the space, so you can see that it's slightly positively pressurised before going into the room. And at high level up here, you've got a test board. So this is where a validation engineer would come around, inject aerosol behind the fan filter and measure the downstream concentration to make sure that the filter is integral and not letting by. So I'll let Brendan fill for another minute while I come back to that presentation.
I hope it's a time and a half. So yeah, so Richard worked very closely with our installation guys to actually make sure the system could be validatable. So we believe there's currently air in buildings and in offices, schools is not tested. The airborne particulate is not tested. When you think about the amount of expenditure on testing water, there's very few people who have acquired water infections or infected airborne. I'll start again. Waterborne infections, but how often do we test the air? That wasn't a very good film, was it?
That'll be a classic.
Thank you very much.
So we've got the sort of baseline system. So it was important to us that we sort of didn't mess about. We wanted a low-cost system that could be rapidly installed by appropriately skilled technicians on site, and then we wanted to use people who are already skilled at monitoring or testing clean rooms to go to sites and validate these systems. So the system we previously presented is pretty much ticked the boxes that we were set. It's low-cost components, they're easily installed and were easily validated. But we found a couple of issues. So one is the noise levels. Another thing is that we wanted to sort of integrate all the controls into a single package that can be delivered to site. So we've been developing this system here, which is sort of the next evolution of it. So it sits in the room a bit like a piece of furniture, but it's a fixed installation. So room side, you've then got a low level intake. You've got an attenuator, which sort of dials down the noise from the fan on the intake side. You've then got a fan, a much more high efficiency fan than you would get packaged with a HEPA fan filter unit. And then distributes high level in the ceiling void, or even without a ceiling at all, or working exposed ceilings, and then through 2 small diffusers over the space. So it's a much more flexible system. It's something we can package up that can be manufactured in advance and delivered to site. We believe that one system measuring about 400 by 700 millimeters will do 80 square meters of space to the standard that we demonstrated earlier with the particle counting. So we believe that's about 18 workstations based on typical density. So it's just a further view showing what's going on inside of it. So this would be a locked up cabinet, so it can't be tampered with, but when the validation engineer comes round, they can open it up, they can check the fans off running correctly, they can directly test the HEPA filter, which is mounted at about eye level there, and they can do the air change rates and issue a certificate against it. So we wanted the same product to be able to do any sort of range of of office spaces and workspaces. So from a single unit capturing 90 degrees of a room up to 360-degree discharge and capture. So it's just reconfigurable on site to work in an office space. Yeah. So what we do is we go into a space, we would look at the areas, look at the number of occupants, look at the likely viral challenge, and then specify a system to suit that. It can be installed pretty much over a weekend. So we believe that the benefits are that it's going to encourage people to get back into the workspace. So a lot of jobs, I think the pandemic's proven, can be done from home, but we believe there are kind of hidden costs to that. So anyone joining a new business is going to feel pretty isolated working from home. We think it's important that they're working alongside other people at the company and can get them up to speed. We think that creatives, I mean, certainly we found that designing this would not have happened as quickly as it has, or certainly as rapidly, had we not been sat around the same table in this space with the system running. You'll find that with Teams or Zoom, if you just want to talk to a colleague, quick 2-minute conversation, you won't hesitate if you're sitting next to them in a room. If you've got to make a point of phoning them up, you don't want to interrupt their day. That interaction isn't likely to happen. We think over the long term, there's a hidden cost to that. And likewise, a lot of office space in London has seen a sudden drop in value because it just isn't being used anymore. So we think there's an advantage for anyone who would install a system like this with the validation certificate as well and the scientific evidence that we've pulled together to provide value to that space again. So to give people confidence to come back into the workspace. So, and while we're actually quite happy with the performance of a mobile system, we think that if you're gonna try and control pathogens, go the whole hog. So we don't recommend in any format top-down, low-level extract system with HEPA filtration would be the way to do it.
Especially that corporate responsibility as well.
Yeah.
It's about your brand value, and I'll let you finish. Yeah,
so this sort of links back to the challenge from CIBSE and from Brendan as well, arguably. More important. So we've basically taken technology from an industry that we know and we've brought it into the workspace. And we've got at this stage an installation that we tested and we can prove is operational. It can be retrofitted to a space, so there's no sort of barriers to installing it into an office space and getting people back into the workspace safely and quickly. And it's validated as well. So there's an evidence package behind it. And it basically gives reassurance. It does deliver peace of mind. So yeah, we've sort of obviously looked into costings and so on, and noise ratings, but I think the next development will be to get that upflow unit together and start testing it. So.
Well, I think that brings it to an end. And we've obviously questions we can answer any questions that there may be. But I'd like to thank you, Richard. It was a very good presentation.
Thank you.
Even if my covering wasn't so good. My infield, should I say.
Great. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's a very informative talk and a very thorough way that you've looked at the sort of challenge and come up with a solution. We've got a couple of questions. So Richard Harris has been pretty productive on the feed here. So there's a couple of questions. I know Richard as well. So first one was, why use DOP testing when DPC testing of filters can provide similar results?
We wouldn't use DOP, we would use an air challenge. DOP in an office environment and even in a clean room environment. So within the clean air office technologies, we would use an ambient air challenge and scan with a HEPA filter downstream. It's because it's not a regulated environment and we wouldn't want to bring an aerosol generator to an office environment with the additional risk of smoke alarms, etc., etc. So we would use an air challenge, an upstream air challenge, the HEPA filter. So we would use DOP.
Yeah, it sort of contrasts in ISO or GMP clean rooms. We would use an oil challenge because it's a long proven and recognised method of testing a filter by the regulatory bodies. But yeah, as Brendan says, in an office environment, there would be enough sort of ambient particle challenge there to demonstrate that the filter was operating correctly.
Right. Okay. Thank you. a couple of other points. There's a query on the use of flexible ductwork, and I tend to hate flexible ductwork myself, apart from very small lengths. There, so but what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, this is largely hard ducted. So, I mean, the principle we work to is usually we make sure that flexible duct is used for more than about 300 to 400 millimeter run, or more than half the duct size within a duct diameter. So it's good for last minute connection and alignment, but it's
the criteria that was set is that it could be fitted by a fit out company. We think it would become uneconomic if it had to be fitted by specialists. So it was about the ease of installation more than anything, and then we would come and commission it rather than, so we would sell the kit and then come and commission it to be installed by others to make it more economic.
And the air is filtered just before it enters the room. So anything that does get picked up or any issues with the flexible ducting, it's not an issue. There's HEPA filtered before the air reaches the room.
So, yeah, it's a terminal HEPA.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would basically, to some extent, designers like myself could make those decisions on behalf of our clients when we specify up a system. From
exactly. It was just ease of installation.
Yeah. Okay. So it gives options, and obviously there's a variance in cost on how we would look at that. So there. Another item is there any opportunity to introduce temperature control into the system?
No, it's a standalone system.
Well, in the retrofitting, no, yeah. But obviously, in the design, when you're designing a building system from scratch, yes, you can. You can integrate the clean air into the HVAC system very easily, yeah. So, in a brand new design, yes, but in a retrofit, no, because on the retrofitting solution, we said it would be complementary to the HVAC. So, we believe air diffusion is going to be critical in the future to provide a clean air or to actually prove the office has clean air or safe air environments. So working with the design at the beginning, yes, it is achievable. If we were involved in a consultancy role from the beginning, we could look at how to adapt the system. But as a retrofit, no. Does that make sense? Or is that clear?
Yeah, that's fine, Brendan. I as a complementary system, you've already got your temperature control in the room, haven't you?
Yes, correct.
If you've got a new build, you've got different options. So yeah, I think that's fine. There. So further to that, I believe you have done testing relative to the clean air path, relative to modelling.
Yeah, we've done. I think this is a working model. So we're sitting in a clean air office as we speak. So this is providing clean air, cleaning down. So this is why we're sitting here. We've done all our interviewing in this room. When we do inductions with graduates, etc., it's always done in a clean air office. So this is, as I say, this is a working model.
And this is a healthy graduate, so it works.
It was a healthy graduate. We've overworked him now.
Okay. We've had another question from Terry Marsh. He's just asking, what is the maximum face velocity to ensure capture by the HEPA filter?
So the face velocity to get sort of a clean down will ramp up to about 0.45 meters per second, but it will typically tick over at about 0.3 meters per second. We find that sufficient to get a clean down.
Okay.
Yes, about 6 meters.
Yeah. A comment from Greg Harris is relative to the cost of filter replacements. Can you give us some typical information on how regular and what sort of cost you'd be looking at on these standard units?
So a filter would be about 250 cost. So that could either be handled by the facilities management company or supplied by the validation company. In terms of filter,
they're all room side replaceable as well.
Yeah.
So the filters are room side replaceable. So you remove the diffuser and then you can drop the filter down.
Yeah, but it likely be on the order of years. I mean,
Depends on what you're doing in the room, but obviously this room is very low shedding. There's very low particulate in it. So if you have carpets or whatever different acoustic tiles, they will shed and load the filter more prematurely. But as I say, we can easily put a pressure drop monitor across the filter, and so it probably has a clean of about 150 pascals or 100 pascals. So we'd say change of 400. So you could do it by a metric as opposed to a time-driven, change out.
Yeah, and we've got an attenuator on the way in. I suppose we could put a G4 sort of roughing filter on the
this was a proof of concept that we've now taken to say, but yes, it will need further development. Yeah. As Richard is doing currently.
Yeah, I literally have a desk with a fan on it at the moment, ready to go into a unit that's being built. So yeah, we're going to have a lot more information coming out over the next month or so.
Yeah, there's some similar questions coming up on issues which you've really not got to a full commercial offering here yet, have you? Is that correct?
On the HEPA fan filter units, yes, there is. I mean, it's quite, we have designed it with the upflow unit or whatever we're going to brand it. That's still in development, but the current system you see here working in, it's a commercial offering. Yeah.
That's good to go. Yeah, we can go and survey and implement pretty much straight away.
Exactly.
Yeah. There has been a question about something you've really been talking about already, about times between filter cleans and disposal of filters, but I'd imagine that very much depends on the use of the rooms.
Yeah, exactly.
The activity within.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, and another question about how does the delivery factors, the SFPs, are they fully compliant with building regulations?
Yeah, so this question came up a couple of presentations back actually, so we looked into it, and my understanding is I'm looking to be educated as well myself on this one, but my understanding is that this only applies to any fan system that's bringing in fresh air from outside and conditioning it. Because we are recirculating within an already conditioned space, we don't believe that it comes under those regulations.
Right.
But,
so
yeah, I welcome any sort of input on that, I think.
Yeah, that's going to be tested somewhere at some stage, I should think.
Can I just pop in?
Go on, Neil. Nick, sorry.
It's just no, it's an interesting point. It's not covered by building regs, I guess, because it's too novel. But you do get requirements for performance for things like fan core units, which recirculate air. So it'll probably just need to be worked up, I guess. Unless it's going to be sort of justified under process rather than normal sort of ventilation.
So it's not involved in conditioning the air in any way. It is purely a recirc, sort of, it's not tempering the air in any way. So that was just my point.
Lighting circuit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Current system.
Yeah.
So yeah, single phase, 5 amp, you're up and running.
Another thing is with the energy.
Yeah, you say Greg Harris has made a comment. Yeah, it's not heating or cooling energy.
So it's just removing particulate. It has one purpose, and that's all it is. That's all it focuses on. Mitigating risk of airborne infection.
Yeah.
But high humidity apparently also mitigates risk of airborne infection as well. So it will be complementary to the HEPA. But it has one purpose.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think we've come to the end of the questions there, gentlemen. Once again, I would say thanks very much for such a considered presentation, and giving us the background to everything you've been doing there. I can see this application being obviously rolled out over various sectors of the market. So anyway, so a virtual hand clap from all of us to you guys. Thank you very much, and no doubt we'll be in touch again soon.
Thanks very much for inviting us, and Ella for organising it.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's good.
For giving us the platform, so we appreciate that too.
Excellent. So I think thanks for everyone who joined the webinar tonight, and hopefully you'll be back on the next one. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Yeah. Good night.
Bye.